Hey guys, welcome to my recap of Lost Season 6, Episode 4, entitled The Substitute. I'd like to begin by saying that this week's episode was a big improvement from last week's episode, which really kind of felt like a filler, and when you think about it, last week was Kate-centric, and this week is John Locke and Smoke Monster-centric. Huge improvement. I absolutely loved everything about this episode, and it definitely gave us more insight than last week. The Flash Sideways followed John Locke, and I was finally drawn into the new storytelling technique. I was actually interested in this alter John Locke because Kate kind of seemed like she's doing the same thing, but John seems very different. For instance, he's still paralyzed, but he is not nearly as angry and pathetic as he was in his flashbacks that we saw seasons 1 through 3. He also seems to have lost his man of faith status. On his way home, his wheelchair lift in his car stalls, so he tries to roll off of it and see if he can make it, but instead stumbles into his own front yard, face first. And then the sprinklers come on, and rather than get upset and start yelling into the heavens like the John Locke we know would have done, he almost seems to laugh off his misfortune. But then we realize why, when the love of his life, Helen, opens up the door and comes out to get him. Helen is alive, and we find out that she and John are getting married. And that just makes me incredibly happy. Now, if you caught the conversation that Helen was having with John when John was in the bathtub, she mentions that rather than doing a big fancy wedding, maybe they should just grab her parents and his dad and go to Vegas and do it shotgun style. Is Anthony Cooper actually a good father to John in this new timeline? If John is in contact with Anthony Cooper, then that means Anthony Cooper wouldn't be a con man in this timeline, which means we might get to see Sawyer's parents. And that also means that Anthony didn't push John out of the window, so John became paralyzed some other way. After witnessing the tragedy of John Locke's life and death in seasons 1 through 5, I find this all very pleasing. He's with Helen, he gets along with his dad. I think it's about time John Locke has something good happen in his life. It seems that even though John Locke is happy, it appears he's getting a run of bad luck. Perhaps in this timeline, John Locke is the unlucky one instead of Hurley. Turns out John lied to Boone on the airplane about going to the walkabout and was denied the same way that he was in season 1. And of course, Randy fires John for lying about going to the conference, and on his way out with his stuff, he runs into Hurley. Or in this timeline, Mr. Reyes. Now, I am loving this new look that Hurley is sporting here. He looks like he's on top of the world, like he's got nothing to lose. Hurley owns this company, which I believe they mentioned in season 1 or 2, and once he finds out that John was fired by Randy, he gives him a number to call to get a new job. This is awesome. John goes in and gets interviewed, and the interviewer is actually the fortune teller from season 3, who Hurley's dad paid to pretend to lift the numbers curse. And she's asking John all these weird questions, so John gets weirded out and asks to see her supervisor. And her supervisor turns out to be Rose. Rose shares that she still has cancer, because obviously she wasn't healed until she came to the island. So Rose works for Hurley, and John works for Hurley. Is this all leading up to Hurley becoming the new protector of the island? I mean, Hurley seems like he's on top of things at the temple, and Hurley really is the only one that Jacob is able to communicate with anymore. And in the other timeline, Hurley seems like he's just in charge of the world. John tells Helen that he has no intentions of contacting Jack about looking at his spine, because there are no such thing as miracles. So Helen tells him that there are miracles, and then she rips up Jack's business card. And John's new job is a substitute teacher. Interesting. But what's more interesting is that Ben Linus is a history teacher? I must know more! Michael Emerson appeared on Jimmy Kimmel Live after the episode and said that they will be getting to why Ben is a teacher in later episodes. He also says that they have just 4 episodes left to film, Ben is still alive to his knowledge, and he still doesn't really have a clue as to what is going on. That's great. 4 episodes left, still in the dark. Perfect. Smokey was keeping Richard in a bag in a tree. That's actually kind of funny. He lets Richard down and suddenly starts acting almost friendly towards him. He gives him some water and then apologizes for knocking him out. Richard asks what he wants, and Smokey responds by saying, "What I've always wanted. for you to come with me. So then Richard asks why he looks like John Locke. And of course, Smokey says that he took John Locke's form because he knew that John would give him access to Jacob, because John Locke was a candidate. Apparently, Richard has no clue what Smokey is talking about, and even asks a candidate for what. And Smokey seems confused and even surprised with this, and then apologizes that Jacob would keep him in the dark. He says, "I would have never done that to you. I would have never kept you in the dark. I would have shown you more respect, unlike Jacob." When Richard refuses to go with him, Smokey suddenly notices off in the jungle a young boy standing there, staring at them. His arms kind of held out to the sides, covered in blood. Wait, I thought it was the smoke monster's fault that everyone was seeing strange things in the jungle, and now even Smokey himself is seeing things? Back at the statue, Ben goes back into Jacob's room to find Alana crying over her dead friends. Ben lies to her and tells her that the smoke monster killed Jacob, and then he tells her how Jacob's body burned up in the fire. So she goes over to the fire pit in the middle of the room and starts grabbing handfuls of ash and puts it into a black bag. Ilana then tells us that Smokey is recruiting. I noticed that they are starting to refer to the smoke monster as he rather than it. For instance, up until now, Ben and Juliet have both referred to the smoke monster as it. It doesn't like our fences, or we don't have a word for it, which means that Ben, who is the leader of the others, may not know anything about the man in black. However, the people at the temple seem to have some kind of clue as to how to stop the smoke monster, and especially what he wants, so I'm just wondering, why wasn't Ben filled in? Ilana also claims that Smokey is now stuck in John Locke's form for some reason. I don't really have any speculation as to why he's stuck, but he seemed like he was pretty free with shape-shifting before Jacob died, so that might have something to do with it. So Lapidus, Sun, Ilana, and Ben go and bury John Locke next to all of his lost friends on the island. And Ben gets up and says a few words, which I believe to be honest and sincere. It was a very sad thing, but I do find it fitting that John Locke was buried on the island, the one place where he never wanted to leave, so I did find it very fitting that that was where he was buried.